Hi, my name's Matrice, and this is the story of how my family made sure I left that room with nothing, except a sealed envelope they never saw coming. At my grandfather's will reading, my parents handed my sister a check for $210 million and looked me in the eye to say, "You're useless. Not every child is a blessing." My sister smirked, tossed a $50 bill at me like I was begging on the street, and they all laughed, like I was just a mistake they were finally done with. But then, the lawyer broke the silence, and when he read my name from that envelope, everything they built, every lie, every dollar, every mask, started to crack. Before we begin, tell me, what time is it where you are? And have you ever been the one your own family pretended didn't matter? Because I was, and I need you to hear what happened next. The first thing I noticed was the smell, polished wood and coffee that had gone cold too long ago. That, and how nobody looked up when I walked in. The room was square, professional, cold in the way only corporate buildings manage to be. That kind of chill doesn't come from air conditioning. It comes from years of conversations nobody really wants to have. I stood there for a second, unsure where to sit. Then I picked the seat farthest from my parents, without really thinking about it. Corner chair, slightly uneven leg, close to the window but not quite close enough to feel anything warm. My father didn't say a word. His eyes stayed on the closed manila folder in front of him, like whatever was written inside was more interesting than me. My mother was adjusting papers that didn't need adjusting. She was always fidgeting when she wanted to look composed. Rainalu, my older sister, looked up just long enough to meet my eyes and then went back to scrolling her phone, thumb moving like she'd done this 1,000 times before. I sat down and crossed my legs slowly. If there was a pecking order in this room, I wasn't even in the lineup. Across the table, Mr. Whitaker, Arthur James, technically, but no one called him that, cleared his throat. It wasn't a polite sound. It was a warning bell, a clearing of space, like he was making room for something heavier. "Thank you all for coming," he said in that deep, gravel-coated voice of his. "I understand today is significant." His words hovered in the air a second too long. My name hadn't been mentioned yet. Not once since I arrived. Not by him, not by them. Whitaker started reading from the paperwork in front of him, going through procedure like he was explaining a game everyone else already knew how to play. Something about power of attorney, the legal capacity of the executor, notarized instructions. I listened, but none of it stuck. It all sounded like courtroom talk, but there wasn't a judge, and I sure as hell didn't remember getting a defense. I kept my eyes on the table. It was, spotless. Polished so well I could see the reflection of the ceiling lights on it. No one had spoken to me directly, and the longer that lasted, the more I felt like I wasn't supposed to be here. Then came the paper. I heard it before I saw it. A soft slide, like money, or worse, betrayal. Raina reached for it without hesitation. A check. The number was written in looping ink. $210 million. Not typed, handwritten. Like some god had signed off on it personally. She didn't smile. That would have been too obvious. No, she tilted her head slightly and tucked the check halfway under her phone like it was just another bill. Like that kind of money didn't change anything. My parents were watching her like they were waiting for a thank you, but Raina didn't give them one. She just nodded, and they beamed like she'd just handed them the keys to heaven. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence was already filling the room like a slow gas leak. They didn't even look at me. The check had landed. The winner had been crowned. And I wasn't even in the race. It was almost funny if you had the kind of humor that ran dark. I sat there, staring at the table like maybe it would split open and offer me a different version of this life. One where I mattered. I leaned back slightly, careful not to make noise. Even my breathing felt like it had to be measured. I remembered the last time I felt this way, like furniture in a room built for someone else. I was 16. Raina had just gotten into Yale, and my father threw a dinner party for her with more guests than we had chairs. He made me eat in the kitchen, said someone had to help serve. I did too. I brought out the roast, smiled at their guests, refilled wine glasses like a damn waitress. And when it was all done, no one thanked me. No one remembered I was even there. Back at the table, Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat again. There was something else coming. I could tell by the way he shifted in his seat, like a man holding a card he hadn't meant to play yet. My parents were still beaming. Raina was pretending not to gloat, which somehow made it worse. The air in the room shifted, subtle but sharp. Something wasn't finished, and neither was I. The check had been claimed, the room momentarily quiet. I could feel a faint vibration under the table, maybe the building's old heating system or my own nerves misfiring, but no one moved, no one said a word, not even Mr. Whitaker, who had flipped to the next page with quiet ceremony but hadn't spoken since. And yet, something was still hanging in the air. You know that moment when everyone's waiting for the next shoe to drop? That's where we were. The applause had ended, but the act wasn't over. I felt it in my chest before it reached my ears. Then my father finally turned toward me. He didn't lift his voice, didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't even blink in my direction. Just a slow, almost methodical exhale, like this was something he'd rehearsed. "You're a grown woman, Mitrice," he began, folding his hands neatly in front of him. "It's time you learned how to earn your own money." His tone was that dry, instructive voice he used to lecture us about leaving dishes in the sink. There was no emotion behind it, just the same cool efficiency he used when reviewing taxes. The sentence didn't sting at first. It landed more like a memo. But then I realized he wasn't offering guidance. He was closing a door, slamming it without the decency of a loud bang. I looked over at Whitaker, hoping for a pause, an interjection, anything that might suggest this wasn't part of the plan. But he didn't so much as flinch, just sat there, pen in hand, like this was nothing more than a formality. It wasn't. That sentence, those 7 words, weren't about money. They were about value. Mine. He didn't say I could earn something. He said I should go somewhere else to find it. Somewhere not here. Somewhere not in this room, not in this family. I kept my face still. It was something I'd learned early, how not to let a man see what he'd just broken in you. But he wasn't finished. My father tilted his head slightly and added, "You're useless. Not every child is a blessing." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They just settled, slowly, like dust on skin that's already been burned. The worst part wasn't the words themselves. It was how casual they were, how cleanly they fell out of his mouth, like he'd been waiting to say them. I didn't breathe. My body stayed frozen, but my mind sprinted. It ran backward through every scraped knee, every missed birthday, every time he'd shown up late or not at all. Every time I thought, maybe this year he'll see me. And then it sprinted forward, faster than I could hold it, into every future moment I hadn't lived yet. Every time I'd hear that voice in my head, whispering those same words, "You're useless." My mother didn't object, not a flinch, not even a glance in my direction. She just shifted a pen across a blank page like it was her job to look busy while I bled in front of her. "And Raina?" She smirked. Just barely. The corner of her lip, tugged upward, so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been trained to look for it my whole life. She didn't need the check to win. This was her real prize. I looked around that room. I scanned faces, searching for something. Compassion, regret, even discomfort. But there was nothing. No resistance, no pushback. The verdict had been delivered. I'd just been publicly sentenced, and no one was appealing. The air felt thicker now, The walls hadn't moved, but the room had shrunk. Or maybe I had. Still, I said nothing. Not because I agreed, and not because I was afraid, but because I would not, under any circumstances, beg for a place at a table that had already decided I didn't belong. My sister didn't rush. She moved with the kind of ease you only see in people who know the room belongs to them. Raina slowly unzipped her designer purse, some stiff-looking thing with gold buckles, and took her time fishing around inside. Not one person asked what she was doing. They just watched, silent, like they were waiting for a performance to resume. When her hand came out, she was holding a neatly folded bill between her fingers. $50. She placed it down in the center of the table and slid it across to me like it was some sort of peace offering. "Here, use this for now," she said, smiling faintly. The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. They were delivered in that sugary tone people use when they want to remind you they're better than you. Like she'd been waiting her whole life for this line, and it finally got its moment. My mother laughed. Just a small puff of air through her nose, like she didn't want to draw attention, but couldn't help herself. My father chuckled too, a short, satisfied sound. Even Mr. Whitaker's lip twitched, like he might have let something slip if he wasn't paid to stay neutral. And me? I didn't touch the money. The bill sat there between us, bright and humiliating. It didn't matter how many digits it had. It could have been a 20 or 100 or Monopoly cash. The message was the same. This is what you're worth. This is your cut. My cheeks went hot, but I didn't move, didn't blink. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to ground myself in the feel of my own skin. Because what I really wanted to do was stand up and scream. Instead, I stared at that 50 like it might vanish if I willed it hard enough. It didn't. My heart started thudding behind my ribs. Not loud, just hard enough to make my ears ring. The way shame does when it arrives before you can stop it. Funny how your body knows before your brain catches up. I wasn't thinking yet. I was just feeling. My face felt too warm, my throat too tight. I was vaguely aware of the way my heels pressed into the carpet, grounding me, keeping me from floating right out of that chair. Mr. Whitaker looked down briefly. A man used to watching families devour each other without interrupting. I wondered how many times he'd seen this exact scene. The golden child rewarded, the quiet one dismissed. I wondered if he ever thought about the people who leave his office changed. No one said anything, not to me anyway. And in that silence, the memories came flooding back. They always do when no one is looking. I remembered the summer I left my first real job to come home and help when Mom had her second surgery. I'd just gotten promoted, had a lease lined up. I packed it all in 2 days because Dad called and said, "Family needs you." Raina didn't come home. She sent flowers. I remembered staying late every Sunday to sort Mom's meds, driving Dad to appointments, running point on whatever Raina couldn't be bothered to do. No one asked me to do it, but I didn't ask to be forgotten either. I wasn't keeping score. I never had, but I wasn't invisible. At least, I didn't think I was, until that 50 hit the table and said otherwise. They didn't count the sacrifices, the missed chances, the 1,000 quiet ways I showed up when no one else did. And I never wanted a reward, not really. Just acknowledgement. Just not to be the punchline in a joke no one would admit they were in on. I looked down at the bill again, a single square of folded paper holding more weight than it ever should have. There was a moment, just a flicker, where I thought about picking it up, not because I wanted the money, not even out of pride, just to end the moment. To move us forward, past the discomfort, like I always did. Make it easy for them to pretend nothing happened. But I didn't move. I realized then what they had always misunderstood. My silence wasn't surrender. It was restraint. They thought quiet meant weak, that not speaking up meant I had nothing to say. But I was choosing not to fight, not because I couldn't, but because I knew they weren't worth the explanation. The bill stayed on the table, and I stayed in my seat. Still, stronger than they realized. The room didn't move. Not even a breath shifted after the laughter faded. It didn't die suddenly. It just settled. Like everyone was full now, like they'd had their fill of me. And what haunted me most wasn't the laugh itself. It was how easy it had been, how natural. No shock, no awkward glances, just a few smirks, some amused exhales, and then stillness. That joke worked because it didn't feel out of place. It didn't stretch any boundaries. It confirmed what had already been decided a long time ago, just not said aloud until now. No one rushed to fix it. No one said, "That's enough." My father cleared his throat, leaned back in his chair, and crossed one leg over the other. His body language wasn't tense. It was comfortable. The kind of ease people carry when they know the conversation is under their control. And when he spoke again, his voice didn't rise. It didn't break. It didn't tremble like mine might have if I dared to say something that final. He said, "Not every child is a blessing." Like he was quoting scripture. Like it was just a fact. He didn't even look at me when he said it. That made it worse. It landed in the room like a sentence passed down by someone who'd already decided they were finished debating. I sat there frozen, trying to process if I had heard him right, and realizing I had, because no one flinched. The words didn't echo. They just stayed. I felt them spread through my chest, down my arms, into my gut like cold water. Not hot, cold, slow and numbing. That sentence didn't just hurt, it rewrote everything. It reached back through birthdays, graduations, hospital visits, Christmas mornings. It rewrote the times I thought we were okay. It rearranged every compliment I'd ever been given. Every time I was told I was the dependable one. All of it now repackaged as misunderstanding. I hadn't been loved quietly. I had been tolerated, maybe even resented. I looked at my mother. I didn't even expect her to protest. I just wanted her to look unsettled, uncomfortable, anything. But she stayed still, expression calm, fingers lightly tapping the manila folder in front of her like she was waiting for the next item on the agenda. No crease in her brow, no glance in my direction. Her silence didn't scream, but it confirmed. And then, for a second, I looked at Mr. Whitaker. His eyes flicked toward me, just for a breath. He didn't speak, of course. That wasn't his job. But he stiffened slightly, like even he knew the line had been crossed, like he'd been through 100 will readings and still hadn't seen one quite like this. And still, nothing. The silence that followed was worse than yelling. It felt like a verdict. I glanced around the table. No one shifted. No one averted their gaze. If anything, they seemed relieved. As if they were thinking, finally. We said it. Now we don't have to pretend anymore. I wasn't crying, not because it didn't hurt, but because something in me had gone quiet. The kind of quiet you feel when your body knows no one's coming to help. A stillness that builds when the walls around you have stopped being walls and started feeling like mirrors. I stopped hoping for a different outcome. I stopped scanning the room for someone to step in. I began observing their posture, their breathing, their comfort. I wasn't part of them anymore. Maybe I never was. But now I was watching the scene like a stranger. And somewhere in the middle of all that, something shifted. Not loud, not sudden. Just a quiet break inside me. A gentle snapping, like a thread giving way after holding too much weight for too long. I no longer needed to argue. I didn't even need to be understood. I just needed to see things clearly. And what I saw now was a room full of people who decided I didn't belong, long before we ever sat at this table. It was strange how quickly the air could settle back into pretending. The moment after that sentence, "Not every child is a blessing," you'd think the room would shatter from it. But it didn't. It just folded in on itself, quietly, like it had heard something it already knew. I sat there with my hands clasped tight in my lap, legs crossed at the ankle, posture straight like I was at church or in a courtroom, except I was both the accused and the forgotten. My back stiffened on instinct, the way it always did when things got uncomfortable. I knew the next part before it even came. The reflex, that old reflex to fix things. It started low in my gut, tight and familiar. I felt the words creep up my throat, like I might actually say something to make them feel better. I almost opened my mouth just to break the silence, just to ease the weight pressing down on the table. I've always had this habit, smoothing over rough edges, patching broken tones, making sure nobody else got too upset. As if their discomfort was something I had caused by simply existing in the wrong way. And for a second, just a second, I actually thought, maybe I should say something to calm things down. I caught myself. My name hadn't even been spoken once during the reading. Not officially, not with respect, not with inclusion. And yet, here I was, trained like a reflex, bracing to be the peacekeeper again, the fixer, the one who smooths things out so others don't feel bad. I looked at the $50 still resting on the conference table, folded once, face up, unmoving, like it had been waiting this whole time for me to pick it up and end the moment with one small symbolic bow. "Thank you for your scraps. I'll take this and go now." I stared at it so long the numbers began to blur. It would have been easy, so easy to just reach across that table, grab it, chuckle politely, and walk out like I wasn't shattered. I could have given them the ending they clearly expected. Quiet acceptance, neat retreat. God knows I've done it before. Different ways, smaller scenes. I've let things go. I've let things slide. I've chosen grace where I should have chosen self. I've stayed silent when I should have stood. I've made their comfort a higher priority than my dignity more times than I can count. It's a quiet shame, that kind. It doesn't come with fireworks. It just lingers in your chest, like a bruise nobody sees. Then she spoke, my mother, softly, almost like she'd been waiting for the moment I'd start to rise, and felt the need to bring me back down gently. She said, "You've always been a little too sensitive, Matrice." Her tone was careful, polished, not sharp, not loud, but deadly in its control. It wasn't an insult, it was a diagnosis. She wasn't correcting me, she was explaining me away. I turned to look at her fully for the first time since we entered the room. She didn't flinch. She just held my gaze, almost kindly, like she was offering me insight, a truth to help me live better. "That's the problem," she added. "You take everything so personally. It makes things harder for you and for us." For us, there it was, the invisible labor I'd done all my life, trying not to be too much, trying to manage myself in ways that would make me more palatable, trying to hide the parts of me that weren't useful to them. I'd heard this exact script before, not always with those words, but the message was the same. If you weren't so affected, this wouldn't be so hard. I remembered being 10, crying in the car because I was left behind at school after a play. I had stayed after to help clean up. No one showed up. When they finally came hours later, I was the one who ended up apologizing for making them worry. "You have to learn to let things go," my mother had said back then. "It's not always about you." But sometimes it is, and this moment was. I looked at each face around the table again. Dad, still looking off like this was just business. Rainalu, expression unreadable but completely at ease. My mother, giving advice as if we were in some polite disagreement over holiday plans. and the lawyer, eyes flicking between us but staying exactly where he was paid to stay, silent. I felt like I was underwater. Every sound was muffled. My head felt light. And for a second, I couldn't tell if I was shaking or just sinking. I thought about standing up and walking out, quietly. Not out of anger, but out of surrender. Just leave. Let them win. Let them keep their silence and their structure and their stories that worked better without me. Let the record show Mistress Hale didn't make a scene. I imagined it. My hands gathering my purse, nodding once, offering a tight-lipped smile, and slipping out the door with dignity. I even imagined what they'd say afterward. She took it well. She was always mature. She's got a good head on her shoulders. She knew this wasn't her place. They would have made it sound noble. They'd say I'd risen above, but I would have known better. It would have been defeat dressed in grace. It would have been the final act in a habit I'd perfected over decades, making things easier for everyone else, at my own expense. And I almost did it. Almost. But then the lawyer cleared his throat, and everything paused. That was when the lawyer cleared his throat, and everything paused. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't commanding. But in a room where silence had been used like a weapon, any disruption felt seismic. Mr. Whitaker adjusted his glasses, slowly, deliberately, like he knew the moment had teeth. For the first time that morning, he didn't seem quite so polished. His professionalism held, but his rhythm, his courtroom calm, shifted just a notch. He didn't look at me. He looked at my father. "There is one more item," he said, voice steady, but a touch lower now. I watched my father stiffen, not visibly, but internally. Like a door he thought had been shut just creaked open behind him. My mother blinked once. That was all. Raina Lou leaned back in her chair with an exhale that bordered on bored. My first thought? They think it's just paperwork. Some final dotted E's and crossed T's. Procedural leftovers that didn't mean anything. But Mr. Whitaker's hand didn't reach for a file. He didn't tap any digital screen. Instead, he leaned slightly to his left, opened a small leather satchel at his feet, and brought out something I hadn't seen before. A sealed envelope, thick, off-white, the kind that looked older than anything else in the room. He placed it on the center of the table like it weighed more than it should have. "This was entrusted to me," he began carefully, "by your grandfather, personally, separate from the will, and to be opened after the official reading if certain conditions were met." My father's face didn't move. He didn't blink, didn't shift, but his hand gripped the armrest like it had something to prove. My mother leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing, but still composed. Raina smirked. "What is it? A farewell letter?" No one answered. Mr. Whitaker kept his eyes on the envelope. "It was not intended for public reading," he continued, "but given the nature of the meeting and the names involved..." He trailed off. Then finally, he turned the envelope toward me. That's when I saw it. My grandfather's handwriting, shaky but clear. My name. Only my name. Not Calvin Ray, not Lorene, not Raina Lou. Just to Mistress. For a moment, I genuinely thought I misread it. My breath caught, shallow and involuntary, like my body didn't know what to do with the possibility. The silence stretched long. No one reached for the envelope. No one said anything. I glanced at my father. His jaw was tight, not angry, just caught off guard. And that was rare. My mother? She was watching the envelope like it had insulted her personally. And Raina, still lounging, let out a short breath that was somewhere between a scoff and a laugh. "Well," she said, "he always did have a soft spot for strays." My head turned slowly. I didn't respond, didn't give her the satisfaction. But inside, something stirred. Not pride, not validation. It was too early for that. It was something quieter, hope, and it scared me because I'd learned long ago that hope, when misplaced, hurt worse than hatred. Hope would make you sit by the phone. Hope would make you give second chances. Hope would keep you in the room long after your seat had been taken. So I tried to dismiss it. I reminded myself that envelopes didn't fix anything, but my body betrayed me. My spine straightened. My fingers relaxed slightly. My ears listened harder. Mr. Whitaker placed the envelope closer to me, but didn't ask me to open it. "It's your choice," he said, voice low, almost gentle. He asked me not to interfere. For the first time that day, it felt like I wasn't on trial. I wasn't being mocked. I wasn't being weighed and discarded. I was being seen. And I didn't know what was in that envelope. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was worse than nothing. But it wasn't addressed to my parents or to my sister. The envelope wasn't addressed to my parents or to my sister. The words hung there, unfinished, until the room caught up with them. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat again, softer this time, as if he understood what those words were about to do. "For the record," he said, careful and precise, "the addressee is Mistress Hale." He said my name clearly, not rushed, not buried in a sentence, not softened, just my name. Something shifted before I did. I felt it like a pressure change. My father's eyes flicked to me, quick and sharp, then away. It was the first crack in his composure all morning. My mother straightened, her lips pressing into a line that meant she was calculating. Raina stopped leaning back. She leaned forward. I stayed still. I'd learned early that when my name was spoken, it usually meant trouble, a reminder, a correction, an accusation dressed up as concern. I was spoken about far more often than spoken to. Decisions were made for my own good, without asking what I wanted. Stories were told where I played a role but never had a voice. So hearing my name placed at the center of the table felt unreal. Like seeing your reflection where you didn't expect glass. Mr. Whitaker nudged the envelope a few inches closer to me. He didn't push it all the way. He didn't look at my parents when he did it. He looked at me. My father exhaled through his nose. "That doesn't make sense," he said, calm, measured, the same tone he used when dismissing a contractor's estimate or correcting a waiter. "If there's a personal note, it should have been handled privately, after the estate was settled." My mother nodded once, already aligned. "This is highly irregular." Raina laughed softly. "Is this some sentimental thing? Grandpa always liked his little secrets." Mr. Whitaker didn't rise to it. "The instructions were explicit," he said. "The envelope was to be presented after the will was read, in the presence of all beneficiaries, and it was not to be opened by anyone other than the person named." My father's jaw tightened. "We're the executors." "You are," the lawyer agreed, "of the estate, not of this." Silence followed. Not the heavy, crushing silence from earlier, but a thin, brittle one, the kind that cuts if you move too fast. I realized then that something important had changed. They still had money. They still had history and influence and the comfort of each other's approval. But they didn't control this moment. And that made them uneasy. I didn't reach for the envelope right away. I needed a second to steady myself, to remind my hands they didn't have to shake, to remind my heart that this wasn't a trap. I thought about all the times my name hadn't mattered, when I'd covered for someone else's mistake, when I'd been asked to be the bigger person, when silence was praised as maturity and protest, was labeled drama. This wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about proving anything, it was about acknowledgement. My mother leaned forward. "Mistress," she said softly, the way she always did when she was about to reframe something as my fault. "You don't need to read that here. We can talk about it later, privately." Later, privately. Words designed to pull the moment back into their control. I met her eyes. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just reached out. My fingers touched the envelope. It was thicker than I expected, heavier. The paper was worn at the edges, like it had been handled more than once. I felt Raina's gaze sharpen, felt my father's attention lock onto my hands. For the first time, they were watching me, not with judgment, with uncertainty. I lifted the envelope but didn't open it. I needed to see the handwriting again, to be sure. The slanted letters, the uneven pressure, my grandfather's. I hadn't opened it yet because I saw my grandfather's handwriting. There was no mistaking it. The looping letters, the slight backward slant, the way he never quite dotted his I's. I'd seen it before in birthday cards he insisted on mailing even when he lived 10 minutes away, on sticky notes he'd leave on my windshield when I was still learning to drive, too proud to ask for help, too nervous to admit I was scared. One note in particular came back to me. "You're stronger than they pretend you aren't. Don't let them write your story." He'd left it folded inside a book he knew I was reading, one he never asked about. He never needed to. He just knew. The room wasn't quiet. It was suspended, like everyone had inhaled and forgot what to do next. I held the envelope in both hands, my fingers brushing across the sealed flap, as if touching his script could tell me what was inside. Mr. Whitaker gave me a nod. Not permission, just presence. He knew what was coming. He always had. I didn't say anything, just handed the envelope back to him. He cleared his throat and unfolded the letter slowly, deliberately, like it deserved time. He didn't skip a line, didn't summarize. He read every word aloud. To Mistress. If you're hearing this read, I'm gone. And knowing our family, I'm guessing things have gone the usual way. I'm writing this because I know what you won't say out loud. And I need you to hear that I noticed. Every slight, every silence, every room you were left out of. I saw it. I never knew how to stop it. But I could tell the truth in my own way, in my own time. You were never the mistake. You were never the burden they made you carry. You were and are the one I trusted most. Not because you needed anything from me, but because you never pretended. I watched how you held your head up when they ignored you. I watched how you made space for others, even when no one made space for you. I know what that costs. I'm not giving you money. I'm giving you the part of the story they tried to erase. In this envelope is a set of letters I wrote over the years, ones I never sent, because I didn't want to make things worse for you while I was alive. You can burn them, read them, share them. But now it's yours, and they don't get to speak for me anymore. With love, Grandpa. By the time he finished, no one was breathing the same. Raina shifted uncomfortably, her arms crossed tighter than before. My mother had gone pale, her lips pursed as if holding back tears or curses. My father, usually a master of containment, stared at a fixed point on the table, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch. The silence wasn't just awkward, it was unraveling. No one argued with the words. They couldn't. They were too clean, too factual. There wasn't a trace of blame in them, and somehow that made it worse. There was no fight to pick, no tone to mock, no mistake to twist, just clarity. He hadn't exposed them in anger. He'd simply made them visible, and in doing so, made me visible. My sister opened her mouth once, then closed it. Whatever clever line she was reaching for slipped away. For the first time in my memory, she wasn't the center of the story. She couldn't even find the edge of it. My mother finally whispered, "This feels excessive." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even directed at me. Just a reflex. A way to reframe discomfort as overreaction. A skill she'd sharpened for decades. My father sat straighter, like he was trying to reassert the room. "We should revisit what's legally binding here. Sentiment isn't structure." But Mr. Whitaker stayed calm. The letter is part of the estate file. Per his will, these words are to be entered into the record. No actions need to follow, but the acknowledgement was his instruction. So there it was. This wasn't about a clause. This wasn't about assets. It was about truth, with witnesses. I looked at the envelope again, the real one. The one with more letters inside, the ones my grandfather said I could do whatever I wanted with. He'd written them knowing I might not be ready to read them all at once, knowing that truth sometimes takes time to settle in the bones. But he'd also known this. Once I heard his voice, I couldn't unhear it. I couldn't pretend anymore. It wasn't about fighting back, it was about no longer absorbing. They'd held the money, the meetings, the plans. But now I held the story, and they couldn't unwrite that. My fingers gripped the envelope again, not as something fragile, but as something earned. My sister watched me, still waiting for me to break the tension with a joke, a shrug, a smallness she recognized. But I didn't. The room hadn't gotten louder. It had just shifted. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was the one the letter had been for. My father finally spoke, but not to me. He looked at Mr. Whitaker as if the attorney had somehow created this whole mess. "I think we all need to take a moment," he said, voice steady in a way that sounded more like performance than emotion. "There are things that should have been said in private." I stayed silent. I knew that tone too well. That wasn't regret, it was a reroute. An attempt to manage the narrative, just like always. Then he turned to me, slowly, deliberately. "Mistress," he said, choosing my name like it was foreign on his tongue. "I didn't know your grandfather had done this, and if I had, I would have tried to talk him out of it. Not because of what he said." He paused, just long enough to pretend he was searching for compassion. "But because of how it might affect you moving forward." The room felt still, but not calm, like it was holding its breath, watching to see if I'd give him what he wanted, a thread to pull, a reaction, a weakness. I didn't, because I heard it for what it was. Not an apology, not even accountability, just damage control dressed in politeness. He wasn't sorry for what happened, he was sorry it was said out loud. My mother still hadn't looked at me. She sat stiff, arms folded, her eyes locked on a corner of the table like she was reading scripture. Raina kept crossing and uncrossing her legs, chewing on her bottom lip in that way she always did when attention shifted away from her. For years, I would have responded with silence and called it grace. But silence wasn't grace, it was survival. And I wasn't surviving anymore, I was choosing. So I stood up. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't push my chair back hard or raise my voice. I simply placed my hands on the edge of the table, tucked the envelope against my side, and said, "There's nothing left I need from this room." Mr. Whitaker nodded faintly. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't need to. No one else moved. And that, somehow, told the entire story. I walked out with the kind of steadiness that comes from knowing something final has happened. Not loud, not explosive, just final. The hallway outside the conference room was colder than I remembered. The polished floor didn't echo with my footsteps, but I could still feel each one settle beneath me, like the building itself had been waiting for me to walk through it this way. I didn't look back, not because I was angry, but because I was done. Out on the sidewalk, the late afternoon sun was starting to lean west. Charleston's air carried that strange, in-between stillness, when the humidity hasn't let go, but the light is already softening. I paused just long enough to feel it. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope again, and sat down on the bench outside the office. I didn't open the letters inside. Not yet. Not because I was afraid of what he wrote, but because I already knew what mattered. He'd chosen me. Not as a rebellion, not as a weapon, just as someone he believed would understand. And he was right. What my grandfather gave me wasn't justice wrapped in paper. It wasn't revenge served through words. It was permission to stop asking for space in rooms that always measured me against the wrong things. I didn't need a speech. I didn't need forgiveness from people who never thought they owed it. What I needed, he gave me. Truth, quietly delivered and never taken back. There are moments in life that don't change what happened. They just change how much you carry from it. And this was one of them. The letters inside that envelope weren't instructions. They were echoes of the man who saw me when it cost him nothing, and the man who gave me proof that I was never invisible. I sat with that for a while, let the sun move a little lower, let the tension in my shoulders shift from alertness to something like peace. And then I stood up, not because there was more to say, because there wasn't. I didn't leave with their approval. I left with my name intact.